Provincial IEC Centre. Tumelo, what story is developing on your side?
Well, the voting is coming in, and also they're starting to count the votes here in Mpumalanga province. About 30% of the votes have already been counted so far, and also we understand that in Victor Khanye municipality they've completed counting the votes there. That's in the Delmas area. That's very close to the Gauteng area. It's a very small town and it's a small municipality, so that vote has already been done. So far we know that the ANC is leading in the province with about 66%, and the DA is coming there at 13%. The EFF right there in about 12%. In the top five, we can also see that the EFF Plus is also there with about 4%, which is the first time the EFF Plus have made an inroads into this province. But let's talk more about the numbers with our political analyst, Kaya Sithole. Kaya, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let's talk about the ANC. They have like about 66%, and the process is still going on, but it looks like the ANC will lead with a high majority at this stage.
Look, I mean, we are at around 30% calculation of voting districts. So, of course, voting districts do not necessarily correlate to the number of voters. Some districts are bigger than others, but I do think that the trend that we're seeing is that the ANC will emerge victorious. It really just becomes a question of how big the margin of victory is going to be. And I do suspect that compared to 2014, at least, you're going to see a decline in the ANC simply because there's going to be some growth from the EFF side, but also quite importantly, the Freedom Front seems to have made particular inroads. And my suspicion is that really when you look at the type of people that would vote for the Freedom Front Plus, it is people who have taken some exception to perhaps the views expressed by the EFF and the ANC talking about the concept of land expropriation without compensation. And of course, the Freedom Front Plus has been very clear in that it opposes that policy. So for some people, that would have been a safe vote to say, let us give them some muscle in the next parliament so that they can argue to be against the amendment of Section 25. So I do think that it was to be anticipated, but a lot of people didn't actually think that it was going to be so amplified even in a province like this one.
But looking at especially the FFF Plus, this is their first time making inroads in this province, and also the fact that they didn't even campaign in this province. It's quite shocking because they're getting these numbers, especially in the rural parts where it's mostly farm work and also farms in those areas. How did they do this? How did they manage to get into this? We know that the issues of land and all those kind of things is a very is a tough situation, especially in Mpumalanga, because people have been claiming lands, but also there's been a lot of fight around this issue of this land.
I think the way the Freedom Front Plus ran its campaign is really it just understood what its core constituency is, and it focused its activities on that core constituency. And sometimes that tends to be not very visible to the public eye. So of course, when people go to the big political rallies, those political rallies speak to a particular constituency. And if you've decided or you've taken a position that our constituency is perhaps the farm owners who feel that that land is under threat, then you simply target your marketing specifically towards them, and they might not make it to the public discourse because a lot of people probably are far away from the farms. Generally, farms tend to be away from the big city areas where perhaps the access to information and the access to media outlets is much greater. So it sort of becomes a really invisible and a backdoor campaign, and it seems to have worked very well for the Freedom Front Plus. Now, of course, I think after these elections, they might actually come out and say exactly how it is that they achieve this, and if they're going to maintain this momentum and even get up to 5% in a province like Mpumalanga, which has been a traditional ANC stronghold, it will call upon the ANC and perhaps the other two big parties, being the DA and the EFF, to question themselves on how they missed this, because clearly this was a low-hanging fruit.
There were 28 parties contesting provincially in this province. We look at the ATM; it's a new party. They're number 6, but they've also been having fighting within the party. But that has not seemed like it deterred voters, especially in this province, because they're number 6.
Yeah, I think when new parties emerge, of course, there's always going to be a question of how do they learn to actually find the right balance between who should be the leaders that champion particular causes and who should be the backroom engine of that particular party. And I think when you look at the ATM, a lot of people would have thought that somebody like Mzwanele Manye would have put his position forward and said he wants to be the leader of it, but I think he's decided that he wants to be running the back office side and put somebody else as a presidential candidate, which was a good strategy because I think historically he's always been associated with the ANC and not necessarily the good parts of the ANC, so it would have alienated a lot of people if he had put himself forward as the only candidate that was going to champion the cause of the ATM. But I do think that even in a province like this, there is always a need for alternative voices, and a lot of people simply take the view that rather than sitting out an election because they are uncomfortable or unhappy with how the big parties have conducted themselves over their previous mandates, and then they'll say, let me go to the ballot paper and give the mandate to someone else, if for nothing else, just to have some sense of accountability, to force the big parties to then actually answer to someone else. So I do think that it's a combination of people simply saying, we're unhappy with the big parties, we're looking for an alternative, this looks like it's an alternative that is new, it is speaking perhaps to a few key issues that matter to us. And I think what you also see that the small parties do very well is that because they've got a limited budget, they cannot have a manifesto that talks about 30 or 40 different issues. They literally have to pick and choose a few core issues that they're going to champion and make sure that they really drum that message. And of course, that message is definitely going to resonate with some particular people. For example, if you look at the ACDP, they're very clear about their position on really how this secular state must essentially be transformed into a religious state. And of course, there's a lot of people who are religious, so that message is going to resonate with them. So it's always a matter of pick a constituency, attack it, and really do all the best you can to score the votes in there.
And surprisingly, ACDP is number 5, which is they've been there the longest. They should have done better, especially in this province where we see like people that are quite religious and they're it's quite a rural area. They should have done better, but they didn't do that well.
Look, I think for me the ACDP has always been a party that champions the religious cause, but when people go to the ballot, they're really looking for a holistic range of solutions. It's not just a matter of you championing a particular way in which the state needs to engage with its citizens. So of course, this being a predominantly Christian country, that's always going to resonate with particular people. But for a lot of people for whom the core issues are not necessarily aligned to the issues of religion, if people are looking for questions around the economy, access to education, access to healthcare, of course for them, they will get to the ballot box and say, look, the ACDP has only spoken about a couple of particular issues. We are looking for somebody who champions a much broader range of issues. And of course, one doesn't need to vote the ACDP in order to participate in the religious fraternity anyway. So it's not like there is something that the ACDP sells that is unique to other political parties. So I do think some people do it as a form of attachment to it, but it's not really the type of party that sells a holistic range of solutions to the electorate.
Kaya, thank you so much for speaking to us this morning. That was Kaya Sitole. He's the political analyst. So far, we understand that the turnout of the votes is about over 60%. So we don't know if that turnout has been affected by maybe protests that are taking place in around this Mpumalanga, because we understand on voting day there was a lot of protest and also people also preventing people from going into voting station, threatening people to go into voting station, and also voting station not have enough ballot papers to continue with voting in some areas. So we will be watching this story as it develops here, Desiree.
Thank you, Tumelo Machoho, coming to us from Mpumalanga. Let's get back to our